Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Sketch Adventure. This time we're going to be looking at simplifying portraits. Simplifying is one of the hardest yet most satisfying things for me to do when I can pull it off. It's one of those few things that I feel determines whether or not I've made a successful painting. You may be wondering, why simplify? Why does it matter? And in truth, it does come down to preference. If we back up for a moment and take a look at photorealism, the type of painting that strives to capture every aspect of a photo taken, well, that's a lot of visual information. It takes tremendous skill to do this, and by no means am I saying otherwise, but my personal preference is realism that has its roots in academic teaching. I like a lot of different realist artists. To name a few, Anders Zorn, Lawrence Alma-Tadema, Ilya Repin, Susan Lyon, Scott Burdick, Jeremy Lipking, and many more. Despite the many differences between all of these artists, they're all being quite selective with the visual information that they choose to include, which in turn creates a look that isn't mistakable for a photograph. Not only that, but the choices that they make with their painting makes their painting stand out as their own. Subject matter aside, we could tell their color palette preferences or their understanding and conceptualizations of form and structure. I always like to compare painting to spoken language. Great artists are very selective with the words they choose to communicate with, and when done well, the handful of words that they choose makes a resounding statement. Photorealism is more akin to learning how to speak by reciting the dictionary, only pages are missing here and there. I say that because learning from copying photos means that the artist will also learn to understand painting through the distortions of value, color, and perspective of a camera lens. So with that in mind, whether I'm doing a 30-hour painting or a 3-minute painting, I always try to keep in mind what I want to express. Even if it's a study, I don't want it to be a copy. The only time I want a copy is if I'm copying the work of a master whose painting I want to learn from, both from a technical standpoint and a design one. Now let's talk about what's going through my head as I paint this portrait. As mentioned in probably every other one of my videos, my first goal is to create a well-balanced and interesting design between the lights and darks. This is a fundamental principle of painting in a realistic way to convey a sense of light and form. The dark shapes should also convey the main structure as well. The clearer these shapes are, the clearer the design of the entire painting will be. Another important key when wanting to create a sense of depth is to paint some sort of background tone. These portraits don't exist in isolation, so even the faintest abstract background will go a really long way. With these sketches, I tend to work a bit more free-form than when I'm doing longer paintings, as well as I jump around in my process. This way of working loosens me up and honestly is quite liberating. That being said, I still need to always be mindful of the simple dark light graphic design. The moment this clarity is lost, the painting will become muddy and unclear. With this painting, I'm using a Niji water brush the entire time. This synthetic brush contains a hollow handle which stores and dispenses water based on how hard you squeeze it. I find it great when wanting to create thin watercolor-like layers or do softer blending. I can always wipe the brush off with a cloth and slow down the water dispensing if I want to create more opaque layers later on. This brush gives me a versatility that's similar to oil painting. Let's talk about beards for just a moment. Any type of material that's desaturated in color will often just appear gray, but the truth is, there's just as many hue variations. The difficulty lies in being able to identify them. Because the more desaturated a color becomes, the harder it is to properly identify their hue. Just keep in mind that no gray is truly devoid of color. Without getting too deep into color theory, one reason for this is whatever light source is illuminating your scene also has color. All light sources have a color that they produce. This will always mix with the local color of an object to create the color that we perceive. Now it's time to finally start painting in the lights. I haven't got my darks to their final darker colors yet, but so long as I'm aware of this, it shouldn't hamper my judgment for placing the colors in the lights. This second major piece to the puzzle will inform me if I've broken the essential 2 color groups once I've painted in all the lights. If I paint any one area in the lights too dark, then I've compromised the 2 value dark light setup I did in the beginning. An old art saying that's relevant here is, your lightest dark should be darker than your darkest light. While there are some exceptions to that, it's a pretty good rule of thumb to go by. As I lay in these strokes that describe the top plane of the cheek, they appear far too light. I know that this is deceptive because once the water sinks in, the color will settle down in value. Always a bit of a guessing game when anticipating the color you need to paint while juggling what you expect it to look like once dry. Lighter colors tend to dry darker, and darker colors will tend to dry a bit lighter. When it comes to painting skin tones in the lights, it may appear as though I'm picking colors that couldn't exist on a person's face. While some part of that is exaggeration, another part is human error, and the last part is a lot of these colors do actually exist, but their saturation is usually subdued enough that they're difficult to spot easily unless you really focus. You'll find reds, yellows, blues, greens, purples, pretty much every color on a face, but they exist in different regions of the face. Reds tend to be more prominent where blood vessels are closer to the surface, such as around the eyes or nose. The forehead, by contrast, appears more yellow, and the bottom third of the face and the chin area has tiny hairs which give a more blue-gray tint. All of these color shifts are fairly subtle, mind you, and my personal preference is to not overstate them. I'm going to pause the demo for just a moment to better illustrate this example. In this self-portrait I recently finished, you can see how I chose to focus on the different color zones of the face. My eyes, nose, and ears have reds and purple hues, whereas in the forehead area it shifts between yellows and greens. Because I have a brassy colored beard and mustache, that of course takes up some of the real estate in the lower third, but take a look at the transitions from our left side of the mustache. I've painted in a green-gray transition between the mustache and darker side plane of the face. I find it very important for myself to always be working on both long, thorough paintings as well as sketches. The paintings will allow me to fully explore ideas, whether those are about lighting, form, shape, color. I get to study them over multiple sessions until I've found some answers. A potential pitfall of working with such a flexible medium as oils is that I may end up going around in circles, being too afraid to commit to any bold statements. This is where gouache comes in. It's nearly impossible to make an indecisive gouache painting. Its very nature is to be bold. I found that this is the perfect complement for my oil painting practice, and I'm always excited to be doing both. I actually like this sketch currently where it is more than I do at the end of the video. I felt at the time the transition in the forehead was just too sudden in color, which it is, but I ended up being a tad too heavy-handed when I painted in the correction. Making mistakes is a vital part of painting and as well as growing as a person. And you know, what could be more exciting than having an excuse to start another painting? As usual, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about for this painting, so I'll let you watch the rest without my chattering. See you guys next time.